Welcome, my friends. You're listening to Be On Air, your companion for launching and growing your own podcast. I'm your host, Kaylee Marks. This show is all about the transformational journey of sharing your message through podcasting and entrepreneurship. Learn from diverse experts and guides as we dive into the heart of podcasting, branding, and online business and share blueprints to achieve your purpose. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you want to start a podcast or want to grow your show, I invite you to book a free strategy session with me via the link in my show notes or on my website. That's all for now. I hope you enjoy the show, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, so today I'm interviewing Bernadine Franco, who is an art historian and educator, fascinated by the influence of women artists and female patrons on the story of American art. In a world where history is written by the victors, who are usually male and Caucasian, she focuses on the art and craft of women. Her podcast, Beyond the Paint, introduces you to a part of the art world you may never have known, the landscape of female visual artists, makers, and collectors. Through the visual expression of and by women, she exposes the astonishing beauty of women's inner lives and gives these makers and artists their deserved place in the canon of art. Her podcast is recognized by the National Museum of Women in the Arts in their list of recommended podcasts to listen to about women artists in 2020. Her podcast is amazing. She puts so much attention to detail into understanding these artists and giving them a voice if they're already passed, or actually interviewing them if they're still here with us. And I'm really excited to break down what goes into making Beyond the Paint podcast with Bernadine. So Bernadine, thank you so much for making time for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Keith. This is an honor. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I know you just reached your 100th episode.
And so many podcasters struggle to get past 7, past 10 even. So I'm just so curious, how does that feel, having worked on this for so long and to have finally achieved that 100th episode? How do you feel?
So very humbled and yet so satisfied. And I have such inner joy from to have this accomplishment. And I feel that I'm right where I need to be. And I just really love being part of this community. I can't even tell you. It's wonderful.
It's so inspiring. What have been some of the challenges along the way that you've been able to overcome?
So when I started podcasting, the idea came from a friend of mine who said, you listen to podcasts all the time. What a great avenue for you to share the story of art, because I teach and I did some blogging. So I didn't have someone like yourself. So I basically started YouTubing, looking up articles. I learned through YouTubing how to start an Audacity account, and I just started to record. But even before recording, one of the things I do is I do a lot of research on any work of art that I'm going to talk about. And so I do everything basically by script. So a lot of research, writing. But in the beginning, my podcast episodes were 4 minutes. When I record in Audacity, because I didn't really get I didn't have a good handle on editing, if I made an error, I would record all over again. So there was a lot of hit and miss, a lot of trial and error. But through that, you just get better at it. You listen to more podcasts, you just get better at it. So it's a skill set, and you just have to keep at it and have a lot of patience and keep at it.
Yeah, the technical hurdles of becoming an audio editor and a marketer and a producer, and then just the performance of speaking. And
right.
One of the really unique things about your podcast is the amount of research that you do on each artist, and the fact that you're giving this voice to artists who sometimes aren't around anymore. Could you talk a little bit about what goes into producing each episode?
Sure. And it's definitely evolved. So when I first started, my idea was to present 2 works of art and do a comparison, but it just didn't feel right. It didn't work well. So then I evolved that to looking at 1 work of art. Maybe the goal was to get the listener to kind of step into the space between themselves and a work of art. And I spent a lot of time in research. First of all, I spent a lot of time looking at a lot of those objects. I would go to museums and I would choose something that really drew me in and I wanted to share it. So it's describing the work, getting people to visually see the work, and then giving context. So with the context there's a lot of looking at scholarly articles and texts and just distilling that so it's very more easily understood. So it's not all this art speak. I wanted to kind of like cut that all out so people don't feel intimidated to stand in front of it, and also to inspire them to go out and do that themselves. And then again, another evolvement of the podcast happened in 2020. It's the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. And I made that decision that, I love women artists so much that I was just going to focus on that. And I think that's valuable because I think it's also important from a podcaster perspective, almost like a niche. Find what you're most passionate about. Find what you know the best and present that versus a broad view of anything. So that's when I started working on just women. And again, but I did hold on to one work of art, one woman, getting, the viewer in front of that work, and then learning about the woman, learning about the context of the times it was made. And again, getting people to also think about and be inspired by that woman so that they too will, go and visit a museum or a gallery and experience it for themselves.
Wow. So I didn't even realize that. So in the beginning, you weren't only focused on women artists. Is that correct?
No. So I was really focused on looking at two works of art. So looking at something from, let's say, the ancient world and then comparing to a contemporary artist. That was my big thing. Wow. But honestly, it was hard to communicate, especially if you don't see it. And it just didn't feel right for me. And that's when I started going to just the one artist.
And so through that change, what did you notice, as you niche down, did you notice expansion in your listenership and in the podcast when that happened?
Absolutely. Very much so. I saw numbers rise, but also then another big game changer. And I want to just nod to you, Keely, because you and I have talked about this. I know, Keely. My heart, Keely. So you, through working with you, you said, why don't you bring in artists that you can talk to? And that was significant game changer. It's so much better for the listener's experience because they hear my perspective, but then they get to hear the artists themselves. And then artists who, especially one artist told me, especially in the time of COVID, they can't, necessarily set up shows at galleries because, so many things have closed, they have restrictions. This is a way to amplify. This is a way of getting their name out, to get their work out. And along the way, I made some really wonderful women friends, which has expanded my life personally. That was something I didn't expect.
That's so beautiful. And the secondary benefits of podcasting, of building our network and building our personal connections with wonderful people is pretty, it's not, I don't know that we can quantify it or put a value on it. It's priceless. And I feel like, for the listener, if you haven't listened to Beyond the Paint, Bernadine paints almost like a prose-like picture of the art, and then also includes historical information and, like you were saying, scholarly research. And it's really fascinating to take something visual and translate it into a purely audio format. And I'm curious, what has that been like for you? And has that opened up new ways of seeing the art for you, or like, what has that process been like?
That's a great question. It actually has. Because how do I bring someone in that space that I stand in and have them really, truly see it? So it has. So it's definitely developed my vocabulary at minimum, right? But it's also, I now look at art definitely in a more broader way because I have to really look more closely and really engage with it more deeply so I can communicate that. So
and many people people can stand in front of a canvas or a work of art and it can just totally miss their heart. Just kind of there's no bridge, and it seems like what you're doing is you're helping build a bridge between people and the artist, and to try and open up a doorway. And you share some really, really beautiful experience on your website about how art kind of first captured you. I'd wonder if you'd share for the listeners a little bit about that experience.
Yes. And in fact, in my 100th episode, I know a lot of times people celebrate those milestones by going back into their archives and giving excerpts of their best episodes, et cetera. But for me, what I did was I turned, my listener away from the painting to myself, because it wasn't anything I planned. I was a young mom, and I went to this art museum because it was something to do with my child, and it was free admission. The first painting I really remember seeing was a work by Frederick Church. It's Hudson River painters, called the Vale of St. Jamaica. And it captured me. I wept. The beauty of this massive, expansive landscape from the 19th century. And it was there and then that I started looking at connecting with art, and I ended up changing my degree. I was working on an English degree, and I got into art history. I did graduate work at Trinity College in American Studies. I ended up becoming a docent at a museum. I did internships there. I worked in education. It became the fabric of my life in every way. Anytime I took a trip, it was always, well, what's going on at a museum? All those things. And how I discovered women was through my internships at the New Britain Museum. They just really spoke to me because in my own upbringing, Italian-American family, very conservative, women artists gave me that path. They liberated me from these kind of constraints of expectations. I raised very traditionally, and it really freed me and liberated me to think in different ways. And the first artist, and I did highlight her in my 100th episode, is Louise Nevelson. These women were so bold. They went up against patriarchy and artistic traditions to create and really highlight and show their own voices. So that's how that came about.
It's incredible. That's
Thank
incredible.
you.
And museums are, it's fascinating because some people may be more moved to tears easily by a sound, like a song or a beautiful orchestra, or maybe theater or something. And through the visual medium to be affected that much, and for some message to be conveyed so strongly through there is a really beautiful experience. I went to art school in college, and I remember art history, and you have art history up until the modern era, and then you have modern art history, and it definitely shaped how I thought about art. And I realized, these aren't just pretty pictures. This is a deeper message, a time capsule that's being passed. And I feel like that's really powerful. But we do need that sort of purport. We need an opening up of the message sometimes, and that's really what your podcast is doing. And so, if I were to shadow you, would you walk us through from start to finish how one of these episodes comes to life? Because I think we could all benefit from your process, because you combine multiple things to make these really rich content pieces.
Sure. So a typical episode is, and even the workflow of crafting episode, that too took time, and it evolved. So I can honestly say after 100 episodes, I kind of got that. So basically what I do is I'm out and about a lot, even through COVID. And COVID gave me some constraints because museums were closed for a while. So I did a lot through digital imagery. And actually connecting with a lot of women artists, interestingly enough, like Instagram. So I find a work that really moves me, and that's sort of the foundation. And I just, for myself, a lot of the works I'm not familiar with. So I kind of walk into that space and look around it. And then I start doing readings around the work and readings around the women artists who made the work. But I also look at things that were happening in its time frame when it was made. I might also look at other artists who are doing similar things. Sometimes I look at what the male perspective is, to get very specific. I wake up early and I spend probably 2 to 3 hours just writing and reading, and just putting a lot of, I try to build at least 4 pages, because that's around 15 minutes of airtime. So my podcasts are usually about 15 to 20 minutes. If I have an artist, they're half an hour. And then I just edit and edit and edit. So that's that part. Then I record. It is on a script, so it's not just free thinking. I need the script to help me organize, and also it gives a better flow. Once I record, then it's editing through Audacity. Then I use a host. I use Spreaker. It is then uploading it, crafting, the title, crafting the description, that in itself is a job. You learn how to do that too better. And, that's a skill set you develop too, because you want to catch the eye of people. And then I always make sure I have resources, and in the podcast notes, I develop all that. Once that's done, then I upload it to a website, and then it's marketing it. My only social media I really focus on is Instagram. So I do a lot through that, so many posts, and I do things like an audiogram, a carousel, those basic things. And then it's just out there, and then work on another one. I do 3 a month. I'm trying to get to 4 a month. The reason I do 3 in many ways is because it's such intense work. I would say I put a good 15 to 20 hours into developing a 20-minute podcast. Wow. So, I know it's more than, because just the research, you don't know where it's going to take you. It's just work I love. I don't want to negate it, because like this morning, I started on episode 101, and I get it's like the muse calls me. I'm up at 7, and I love being in that space. You have to do something you're completely passionate about, because it's not just your passion. There's a lot of, I'm kind of trying to describe work or steps behind it. And I think in some ways the marketing of it is can be the biggest challenges for me, because I'm not as experienced in marketing. It's people like you have helped me in some ways too, to help with marketing.
There's so many great things to dive into there, like starting back at the beginning, the research, and then the writing, the sort of free, it sounds like you kind of free write, and you're not limiting yourself. You're just pouring out as much as you can. And for people who are either struggling coming up with content ideas, or they don't know what to say, I know that I actually ran into this when trying to do a solo episode, which is like, I know a topic I want to talk about. So right. I feel like when it comes to just like riffing and speaking, that can be a barrier for some people. And so what you're demonstrating is like, you can script it. You can write basically an essay about your topic and read it. And that does sound really pro, and it flows really well, and it allows you to structure everything nicely. And so that's a really gold tip there for people, especially it can change. You can go to more free form, but at least in the beginning, if you're struggling getting content out, writing seems to be a good way to do that. And then you also mentioned Instagram and marketing and how that can be challenging. And, it seemed like you experienced some positive benefits, especially when you were talking about artists who are still alive today, or when you actually started to bring them on the show. Can you speak a little bit about that and how that increased the size of your listenership?
It really changed the game for me to bring in artists. So, but even that, it's somewhat structured. Unlike what we're doing, having this free flow, more of a free flow conversation, I still do what for lack of a better word, like an analysis. So I will choose one of their works. So that's when in some ways the artist kind of gives up some of their own freedom in my podcast. So I choose the work. It's what draws me. I write about it. I always bring in, especially contemporary artists, to bring in some kind of historical background. So there's a little bit of art history there. And then I set 3 questions for the artist that they see ahead of time. So there's a little bit of free flow, but it's also framed. And actually artists like that because it's easier for them to be more prepared. But at the same time, I don't want it to sound too scripted when we have the conversation. So there is definitely flow to that. And there's some, back and forth. It could expand or maybe not expand. But for me, it's really important that I have some control of the content, because at the end of the day, it's still bringing my audience that perspective, getting them to go into that arena, but getting to go in the arena of an artist who's contemporary that I'm going to interview. It's been very positive, and it's very genuine, but there's a flattery around it that I get to dive people through their works. Plus, I see things sometimes that they don't see because I'm the audience. So, that's another good point to bring up. I'm the spectator. So because I'm the spectator, I'm part of the artwork in many ways. So they make it, they put it out there. And we're all spectators though. It's just the way I'm engaging with it, my viewpoint of it, what I'm going to take away with it. And artists, they want an audience. So
you're part of that final completion
exactly.
of the goal of the work.
Exactly. And we all are if we step into that space, That's how I do it specifically with artists, and it does help. The other tip I always want to give people too is, not every episode I love. I mean, some of them, they're tougher. They were more difficult to script or to compose. And one of the things I've learned is just not to get so hung up on an episode. It's because I also want to make sure I get episodes out there. So Seth Godin talks about that. He's a marketer and he talks about shipping it. So I'm a big believer in getting it done. Just ship it.
That's
and
huge.
on to the next thing. Stephen Pressfield, also not the art of war. He wrote a book about that too. It's just doing the work and then moving on. Otherwise you get stuck. And I was there in the beginning when I was first doing my much smaller podcasts.
Yeah, it's really true. And because such a huge key in podcasting is the consistency, and it's sort of like showing up week after week or month after month. And so, yeah, it's this mix of quality, quantity, and genuinely just showing up on the mic and putting out the content. And I think one thing about Beyond the Paint podcast that's great is you bring an artist on once a month, right? So you have a couple shorter ones, and that's a great model too. Like not every episode has to be the same. You can make your work easier on yourself and have like a special thing happen once a month or every now and then. And I think that's a really creative way to use your time wisely and just give more variety to your audience as well.
Yes.
And so you're talking about Instagram, and this kind of ties into your work, which is like the value of seeing women through the perspective of other women rather than through the perspective of men. And I think in so much marketing, women are so subjectified and are objectified, I should say. And so I'm curious, like Instagram is such a challenging place for a lot of us, whether it's the app design and how addictive it is, or just the amount of content and being aware of so many things. But what are some ways that you've seen Instagram, and how has that changed as you've been doing your podcast?
The most important way it's helped me or changed is that I get to be in front of other women artists and women artists. I am building a little bit of I wouldn't say following, but I'm having women artists actually come to me now. Again, a lot because they want to get their work out, especially through COVID. And so that's where it's helped in building a community for myself. But now when it comes to art history and just, women from the past, I would say that's not where it's value. That's for me, that's more, you see more in the museum. So that's my opportunity to bring that to you. But Instagram has been valuable that way. I'm not really adept at, I'm getting better at marketing through the Instagram. In some ways, my hope is that I build a large enough audience, and even an audience with women artists, that I will rely less on social media. So that's my big goal. I want the podcast to be the lead, not, to me, Instagram is it's a side avenue that helps me, but it helps feed the podcast to some way. But my goal is to really build an audience in such a way that I don't need to use that. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And do you think one day people look back on like these photos of Instagram gallery feeds and as we look back on art, do you think that somehow that'll be seen as the postmodern art?
It could. So that's a tough question to ask me, Keely, because I'm so about seeing it in person, and it's hard for me. And yet these artists are using it because they're trying to also get people to engage with their works. So my hope is that I can at least take that digital image, especially we see it on our phone, which is very small. We don't experience the tangibility of the work, meaning the medium, if it's paint, if it's sculpture, we don't really walk around it. We don't really see the tangibility of paint. And that is something that's truly missing out of social media platforms like Instagram. I think it's just a springboard because again, and I think even the women artists would agree, they want you in the space of their works, especially women who do like works of large pieces, large installations. You can't, some of the women artists, and one I'll bring up, Catherine Hart, when she does an installation, she uses the space, she uses the way the light hits it, the shadows, all of that as part of the work. You cannot see that in a digital image. So I think part of it is funny, it's just we're talking about this because that is also a big part of my mission in doing podcasting is to get people to think outside of digital. Because again, a digital image can be repeated over and over again. And every time you repeat that image, it's something is taken away. But the real piece, the authenticity of a piece can only be experienced when you're in front of it.
Yes, absolutely. That makes sense. The experience of going and putting ourselves in the space with the art is at least like, it's almost like simulated by you walking through the piece with the listener on the episode.
Right.
And so it's really fascinating how you've used this format to guide people through, and not everyone goes to galleries. So you're kind of giving that, and something you were touching on, which is like, you're building a platform. And this is something I want the listeners to kind of take away from this as well, which is podcasting is a platform, and that platform can be used and leveraged to support other voices. And the more that we get adept, like this is the example of magazines. This is the example of morning television, daytime shows. Like, you build a stage, you build a platform, you get viewers watching, you build sort of this format for how you're going to highlight and interview and feature different guests. And then you start to find that people come out from the community and from your network, and they want to share their work. And so the more time and planning we put into building a platform, we will actually grow the show, because one of the keys to growing a podcast is through networking and is through borrowing the audience of your guests. And so, like, for instance, we have this conversation, you share it, some of your audience maybe tunes into my podcast, some of my audience tunes into your podcast. And in this way we expand and expand. And so I really think about it like we have this microphone, and we're working on turning the volume up louder and louder so the whole planet can hear. And eventually you can have a podcast like Joe Rogan, or like these huge shows where anyone is basically, almost anyone, even almost the president of the United States almost would go onto that show and speak. And so that's the power of what we're doing here. And even though we may be starting small, the platform is huge. And what you're, I think, finding with your show is like, now all these women artists are coming out and supporting and being part of it and sharing their work through it. And it becomes bigger than just even your view. It becomes this platform and launch pad for all these other artists.
So true. So true.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
It's an exciting potential of this platform. And so I know you're also working on some courses, and I was hoping you could maybe talk a little bit about that.
So, and through podcasting, this is another opportunity to, again, take the vision of the podcast about women, especially focus on women artists, and give the audience an opportunity to engage in another way with these works. So I'm developing a course looking at the female figure through women artists, and especially the female nude figure. And so I'm taking 4 contemporary artists, and it's not chronological. It's all by theme. So for example, Jenny Saville does these large women, painterly huge. I mean, they fill a room. And then comparing it to, the Venus of Willendorf, which is this little tiny prehistoric figure, very tiny, you can hold in your hand, making comparisons and looking at body image compared to then. And we don't know a lot because it's prehistoric, but also through the lens of Saville. I'm presenting this as a way, again, to deepen my relationship with those who are my listeners. And it's going to be free. I'm going to give it, I'm going to have it available at the end of the year. Another artist I'm going to highlight, which I'm really excited by, I actually did a podcast on her, Renee Cox, Reclaiming Black and Brown Bodies. And she just the stereotypes that we know about, like Jezebel and the mammy of Black bodies, she turns it on its head. So that's another person. So it gives you a chance to see them up close. I include like a short, I don't want to say lecture, but I'll talk. But I ask you some reflective questions that you can do on your own. So a little bit of our history, looking again through the lens of women through themes like body image, Black and brown bodies, the reclining nude, which was done for hundreds and hundreds of years, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, and this is awesome because podcasts can directly contribute to this sort of course creation process for any podcaster. And so you kind of using the podcast, using the course, creating that symbiotic relationship to give the audience a deeper way to engage with your work is just a great example of the power of podcasting. And I think that is just such a exciting thing that you're doing. And so I'll make sure that information goes in the show notes on that.
Thank you.
Because I don't think this will air until that's actually available. I'm curious, if you were starting over in podcasting, is there anything you would have done differently?
No, I love the journey. I mean, it was a journey that had a lot of challenges and maybe frustrations. I would say that if I could have done anything different, was meeting people like yourself. I met you in the summer, I think so, early summer. Having a coach would have just helped move things along quicker. Does that make sense? But but otherwise, no. I'm so glad I'm doing this. And even though there is a lot of work in it, and it's you need a lot of consistency. You need a lot of patience. It's a beautiful space to be because you meet so many people. And I'm getting more and more feedback. I get people to write to me and tell them, how much it's, helped them look at things in a different way. So that's very satisfying too. And also to the bigger picture, I didn't realize how much I'm helping other artists. Here I am thinking these women have changed my life in so many ways, but I'm able to lift other women, which is a lot of fun too. And
so you were recognized by the National Museum of Women in the Arts. How did that happen?
I wish I could tell. I don't know for sure.
Providence.
All I could think of, I don't know how I got on that list. And they didn't even tell me. Another artist told me. They said, hey, did you see this? So I don't know. But I'm really proud of it because I'm in the company of other podcasters who are they have many more podcasts. The Lonely Palette is on that list. They have more recognition than I do. So it means a lot to me. If anything, I do engage with them through Instagram, but I really don't know. And I've tried to reach out to them to find out. I want to thank them personally. I wrote them a letter, but I don't know. But it's still very, I'm very humbled and moved by it. I thank them.
I think it's probably the valuable content and the time you've put in, like you're saying, almost 20 hours goes in each episode. I think that in and of itself, it's like the quality speaks for it, and anyone who goes and listens will be able to hear that. What advice would you give? You touched on it a little bit, like maybe a coach, but what other advice would you give someone new to podcasting?
The big patience, and know that we are in an arena. This is the cool part. We're our own, it's our own creative work in a sense, if that makes sense. So we don't have someone that we're not part of a news station. We're not part of cable. Whatever we can do what we want. We have that license. And my biggest takeaway, and I said a little bit before, is just get it out there. Don't get into perfectionism, any of that. Just put it out there. And you will get better with time. And again, consistency. And you do have to put in the work. Keely, you've said it all. I can't underscore that enough. And if you're looking for a big monetary return right away, I think you need to look at it a different way. It shouldn't be the driver. You can leverage monetary rewards from it, but I don't think that it shouldn't be your driver for it. It should be something bigger. I also teach. I'm an educator. I'm working on a book on Elizabeth Colt, who's a 19th century art patron. So I do other things. But again, this is just another avenue. I get to share the story of art with other people and other people all over the world. This goes everywhere. So it just aligns with my mission, the way I live my life. So it goes hand in hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's what I love to do best. So it worked out in that sense.
Mixing our passion and our purpose, and I think we do that enough, and eventually profit will come of it.
Exactly.
And I do think there's a magic shift when people get beyond episode 100. They learn enough about their audience and their content, and it takes that investment for things to shift. Obviously people with huge networks, when they start a podcast, it's going to go faster and accelerate. But I just am so excited for these next 100 episodes of Beyond the Paint. And I know
Thank you.
that it's only going to get richer and just expand more. And I'm really inspired by the work you're doing. And
thank you.
So what is the best way for people to get in touch with you? Obviously they can listen to Beyond the Paint podcast on all platforms. I'll put your links in the show notes, but what's the best way for people if they wanted to get in touch with you?
Sure. Especially if you're a women artist and you want to maybe be a guest on my podcast. I would love to hear from you. So my website is beyondthepaint.net, or you can email me at bernadine@beyondthepaint.net. And I'm also on Instagram at Beyond the Paint Podcast. So that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and you do giveaways, and you have great posts on there. You interact with the women art community a lot, and it's just it's a great place. It's a great corner of Instagram. So
thank you.
Everyone go check out Bernadine's podcast and channels. And yeah, Bernadine, I'm so grateful for your time today, for you sharing your journey with the podcast and just sharing your wisdom and for the work you do.
Thank you, Keely. Same here.
Yeah, it was great talking. Have a great day.
Same, you too.
Take care.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Beyond Air. I hope you enjoyed it and are now one step closer to turning on your microphone and broadcasting your message to the world. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know how I can help you on your broadcasting journey by getting in touch with me, and maybe even apply for a strategy session if you want to discuss your podcast idea. You can reach me at www.podcast-farm.com. Till next time, my friends, I'm Kaylee Marks, and thanks for tuning in to Be On Air.